In this session, we would be learning material and labor cost control. Like I just mentioned, we will be addressing two important concepts as a part of this chapter. We would be learning material cost, and then we would also be learning labor cost. Now, to start off with, let us try and focus on material cost control. But before we address material cost control, let us revise what is meant by material. So, material or material cost refers to the cost of material that is incurred by the business as a part of its business activity. Okay, so, depending on the kind of activity the business is engaged into, the kind of materials that the business will consume as a part of its activity, all that put together is referred to as material cost. Now, depending on the type of business, depending on the nature of business, the type and the kind of material that gets consumed would vary. Okay, so, if you're a service oriented business, the kind of materials that you would consume would vary. If you are a product or a manufacturer oriented business, the kind of material that will be consumed would vary. So, the entire thing depends on the kind and the type of business that you are. Okay, the entire pretext of material and material cost depends on the kind and the type of business that you are. So, keeping that in mind, let us quickly look at what is material cost. So, the definition for material cost is like this: cost of commodities supplied to an undertaking. Material cost refers to the cost of commodities supplied to an undertaking. So, if you are a business and then your business needs certain inputs, it consumes certain commodities as a part of its routine business activity, all that put together is referred to as material cost. Now, why is material cost very important, or why is it critical from a business's point of view? Material cost is critical from a business's point of view because when you look at your finished product, okay, when you think about your finished product, when you think about the service that you're availing, your material forms a major portion of your cost. Or when you price your product, okay, when you price your service, a major proportion of your cost would go against the product cost. Okay, a major portion of the cost will be going against the material cost. So that is what is referred, or that is what is meant by material cost. Now, material cost, it is a sum total of all the raw materials and consumables that are used as a part of production. Now, in certain cases, depending on the type, depending on the nature of business, you would be having certain raw materials, and along with the raw materials, there may be certain consumables. Now, what is meant by consumables? Consumables are material that may not be consumed directly as a part of your production process, but it would be still needed. So, you pick up any business, for example, if you go to a workshop, if you go to a workshop for repair, now the workshop, as a part of the routine repair activity, there might be some spare parts. So, spare part would be a direct material. But while installing certain components onto your vehicle, it is mandatory for your serviceman to grease, or he may have to apply some oil, or he may have to apply some kind of a lubrication. So, now what is that? That is a consumable. Okay, so raw materials and consumables would make up your material cost, which is a part of your production process. Another way to look at material cost is your material cost can be your raw material, it can be a work in progress, and then it can be finished goods. So we have touched upon three important categories. The first category is raw material. So what do you mean by raw material? The material that you'll be consuming that needs to be processed, that needs to be worked upon, such that you can convert that material into a finished product. Now that's what you refer to as a raw material. Then you have work in progress. So what is work in progress? Work in progress is a part of your raw material on which you have already started your process, you have already started working out, but it has not reached the finished stage. It has not reached the completion stage as yet. Then you have the finished goods. What is finished goods? The good that has undergone or which has completed all your processing is referred to as the finished good. So when you talk about material cost, it can be classified, it can be clubbed into three. You have raw material, then you have work in progress, and then you have finished goods. Another way to look at raw material is you have direct material and then you have indirect material. So material that is consumed directly as a part of your production process, and then you have indirect material. What is meant by indirect material? Indirect material would be all the consumables. It is needed as a part of your production process, but it may not get consumed directly. So such kind of cost is referred to as indirect material. So we've just touched upon material cost. We saw that material cost refers to the cost of commodities that is supplied to an undertaking. I also stressed upon the fact that material cost forms the major portion of your product cost. Okay, so that is what is meant by material cost. Now, what we are trying to learn as a part of this session is what is meant by material control. Okay, we are learning what is meant by material control. Now, to give you an overview, let's start off with the definition of material control. Material control can be defined as safeguarding of company's property in the form of material by a proper system and maintain them at the optimum level considering the operating requirements and financial resources of the business. So here we are talking about material which is a part of the business's property. It is mandatory for you to maintain these items, these properties for your smooth functioning. Okay, and then in order to make sure that these materials are available in your business, you may have to ensure certain adequate financial resources are also available in your business. So all this put together is what is referred to as material control. Now let's talk about material control a little bit more in detail. Now material control talks about the systematic. Now we are talking about the scope and the need for material control. Now we're trying to address the scope and the need for material control. So what is meant by material control? The systematic control of purchasing, storing, and consumption. So now we've touched upon three major activities. The first talks about getting the material that you need. It talks about getting the material that you need. Second part talks about storing the material that you've got. Then it talks about consumption. Now, if you look at our homes, there are certain material, there are certain ingredients, there are certain commodities that would need a special kind of way how it has been handled. So, for example, if mummy buys paneer at home, mummy would not leave the paneer on the kitchen table. Paneer has to be stored in the refrigerator. Whereas if mummy were to buy garlic, it is not necessary for garlic to be stored in the refrigerator. Okay, so probably what mummy would do is mummy would leave garlic outside somewhere. Okay, or if mummy were to buy certain masalas, if mummy were to buy certain spices, okay, what mummy would do is mummy may have certain shelves designated for storing these kind of material. It would be dry. Those places it would be it would be less humid. It may not be prone to moist. So why is mummy doing all this? So whatever material that mummy is handling with, it has got a certain need. So it has to be stored adequately. Okay, it has to be stored adequately. Now, when you think about an organization's point of view, when we talk about material cost control, we are talking about three major activities. We are talking about purchasing the material, that is procuring the material. You may have to get in touch with the appropriate supplier of that material, maybe have some kind of a negotiation with them. In certain cases, it is mandatory for you to put up your specifications, and then you would go about getting it. Then you would go about purchasing it. Once you have purchased it, you cannot just you cannot just leave it lying around. Okay? It has to be stored in a specific way. It has to be handled in a specific way. Okay? Then what would happen is, depending on the consumption, you have to ensure that it is available at the adequate place. It has to be ensured that it is available at the adequate time. Now, in certain organizations, what would happen is they may have a single procurement unit, but the demand of that item may be across different places. So if you pick up on the example like a construction company, the real estate company may have construction projects going on in various parts of the country, but what would happen is the item would be procured at a single point. So from there, it has to be ensured that it gets distributed, it gets supplied to the points of consumption. So all this put together is referred to as material cost control or material control. Now, why is it necessary for your business to have material control? Now, by having material control process in place, you're ensuring regular and timely supply of the material. Okay, so now there are three important aspects that we are talking about. First is regular supply, second is timely supply, and the third is right quantity. So we've touched upon three things: regular, we are talking about consistent. Okay, now in certain cases, what would happen is, depending on the type of business that you have, you may need the raw material on a regular basis. So if you're a manufacturing unit, if you're a manufacturing company, you may need consumption, you may need a regular supply of the material to be provided to you every day. The second aspect that we are talking about is timely supply. You have to ensure that the raw material is available to you at the right place at the right time. What happens if you do not have a timely supply of material? Your production process could come to a standstill. You may have to put a halt to your production process. Now, that may not be something which may be very pleasant. So, for example, if you are a production unit, you're manufacturing, continuously. All of a sudden, you may have to put a stop to your supply of material. Then the next thing is that you have to ensure right quantity. Now, what is meant by right quantity? Right quantity refers to depending on your demand, depending on what you need in your firm, you have to ensure that you get the adequate supply of your material. Okay, so for example, you need 100 units, you need 100 units of a certain raw material. Supplying 20 may not, help you to carry out your production process. If you do not have the adequate amount of supply, what will happen is your production process may come to a standstill. That is not something that you desire. So there are three important things that you have to consider when it comes to material control. First is regular, second is timely, and the third is right quantity. Now let's talk a little bit more about material control. Now, in certain scenarios, in certain cases, it is mandatory for you to have the right quality and quantity. Okay? You may have to look into the quality aspect as well. I remember a few years back, we were interacting with one of the senior managers of Lay's, the company which makes the processed potato chips. So he was telling, for them to be able to make Lay's, they need potatoes which meet or which fulfill a certain specification. The potatoes have to be long in size or long in dimension. Then you must have seen, whenever you take potatoes, they may have certain cuts, they may have certain grooves. It's referred to as blemishes. Now, now the potatoes that they need for manufacture of these Lay's chips, it cannot afford to have too many blemishes, because what will happen is if it has that, then there will be a lot of wastage. So for Lay's company to be able to process on the potato, to convert that into the chips that they desire, they need the potato to meet a certain quality standard. The same thing goes with every aspect that you think about. I had a friend of mine who was working as the KFC manager, and then he was sharing, at KFC their chicken gets supplied by Godrej. Okay, and then it is a demand, or it is a specification that has been put forward by KFC. Every chicken that is supplied by Godrej, it has to be around 900 grams. Okay. Now, why is the company insisting on that? Because that is when they can ensure the adequate size of the chicken, pieces that KFC would process. So the company has put up a demand. Okay? So in the case of certain scenarios, and depending on the kind of business, depending on the kind of uh, depending on the type of business that you are, you have to ensure that your ingredients, your material, it fulfills a certain quality. At the same time, it fulfills a certain, and then you have a certain quantity of material that is available. Now, moving on, by incorporating material control into your organization, you would ensure that there are minimal losses and wastage. Okay, by bringing in material cost control, what would happen is you would be able to ensure that there are minimum losses and then minimum wastage. Now, it could so happen that if you do not have a proper material control in place, there could be a lot of losses, there could be a lot of wastage. So, for example, at home, mummy would not buy 10 kgs of tomato in one go. Okay? Now, mummy would have a clear-cut understanding about how much of tomatoes would be needed depending on the kind of dishes mummy prepares at home. So based on that, mummy would have an approximation. So she would only be procuring based on that. Now, why does she do this? She does this because tomato by itself, it is perishable in nature. If mummy ends up procuring excess quantity of tomatoes, tomatoes may get spoiled. Okay? It may get wasted away. So mummy is ensuring that there is minimal wastage. Now, talking a little bit more, uh, the reason why another reason why we would have material control in place is because it helps us to ensure efficient purchase, storage, use, or consumption in the factory. Okay, so I touched upon this previously. I told you it involves three important aspects. First is that you have to purchase. Okay? Now, when you're purchasing, you may have to look out for the right kind of supplier. You may have to find the right place. You may have to place the order in the right quantity. Okay, so you may have a demand for 100 units, but purchasing 20 units may not suffice. Or your demand is only 10 units, but imagine you were to go and buy 500 units. So what would happen to the rest? Then the second aspect talks about storage. Once you get the material, you have to think of storing the material. Okay? Once you get the material, you have to think of storing it. Then you have consumption. So consumption talks about literally consumption, okay? The literally usage of it. Now, by incorporating all this, you're trying to bring down your production cost. At the same time, you're trying to maximize the profitability of your company. Okay? By doing so, what is happening is you're trying to reduce the cost of production. And then at the same time, you're looking at maximizing the profits of your firm. Okay, so these are some of the reasons as to why you would need material control.